Hello, hello, and good morning. Welcome to Journey to SEA 2025. This is Shellyan Edwards Barron. Miss Shellyan, I am a creative writing specialist, and I am here to talk to you about reports, narratives, and a little bit of comprehension as well. So, today's session, we're getting into the grading rubrics for the reports and the narratives, and then for the comprehension, what we're going to be doing is taking a brief look at the different types of texts so that you can get into the foundation of understanding how to approach each different type of comprehension text. So thank you for those of you who are joining me live, those of you who are looking at the replay. Thank you so much for your time. If you're looking at the recording, and I should probably say this here, what is happening, I think, as of April 22nd, which was yesterday, Facebook is no longer allowing us to stream to Facebook groups. We can only stream to pages and, well, I'm streaming to my YouTube channel as well. And so I am not going to be able to stream the live directly into the Facebook group SEA Peaceful Approach. So what's going to be happening, I didn't realize it was from yesterday. I would have sent a notice earlier. I thought it would have been from next week, in the new month. Um, so what's happening then is that if you know anybody who used to look at the live through the Facebook group, then please redirect them to YouTube or to my Facebook page so that they will get the lives. I put up a notice in the group and I will probably add another one, but if continuing, you would need to view the live from my Facebook page or YouTube, and I'll put notes and clips, in the Facebook group. But of course, any messages, notes, and so on, definitely Facebook page, which is Word Coach Youth, and the Facebook, sorry, not Facebook, YouTube channel, Wood Coach Limited. That's what we're working with for now. I'm going to be shifting to Journey to SEA YouTube channel, but we'll probably do that when we get to the next cycle. All right. So, for those who are new to the channel and new to the lives, just a quick note about myself. When I call myself a creative writing specialist, the reason I say that is because I look at creative writing from multiple perspectives. I don't only teach primary school students, I work with authors, I work with academic students, all the way up to masters. I do work with PhDs from time to time, but that's a whole involvement, another story. And I look at writing from the perspective of the writer, as an editor, as the reader, because when we're dealing with writing, we're dealing with communication, and we do have to take these things from multiple perspectives. So, what I'm going to do, just give me a moment. Let me um, put a reminder in SEA Peacefield. I sent one a couple minutes ago, but let me just make sure everybody's on the same page with that because um, let me see. I'm not seeing the notice. Did I hit send? Yeah. Um, all right. So I am live for Journey to SEA 2025. Right. All right. So there we go. So we have that, and so everybody would be able to find it. I know these things change, and when we have to make adjustments, sometimes not everybody's able to come over. But all right, so what are we working on today? So we're working on the rubrics, the understanding of what a report is, what a narrative is, and we're looking at what the various comprehension items are. And as usual, for those who were following from before, I tend to use I do reports first. Yeah. I like to do the reports first because um, I think reports are a lot more straightforward and structured, and therefore we're able to, identify and pinpoint different things. So we're going to be looking at the definition and rubric. And I always start here because it's important that students understand what it is they're writing and why they are writing, why they have to learn these things. I know at the primary school level, many adults have the attitude, just tell them what to do and make them do it, and then they will do well in the exam. But remember, writing is something that students would have to do at every level of their academic career. And if we skip the foundation, students struggle, and we can make it a lot easier on them if they understand what they're doing and why. So let's take a look at a report definition. And I'm taking this definition from my 5 reports challenge. So I'm just going to share, it's in the introduction. And if you want, the introduction is actually available for free download. So if you want to get a copy of the introduction, you can let me know. It's on my website. I believe if you go and check the 5 reports challenge, there's a link there for you to download the introduction so you can get this. But if you don't want to go through all of that, just send me a message on Facebook or WhatsApp. I'll put up my number in a little bit. But we're looking at definitions because students need to understand what they're doing and why. So this definition is in those documents. It is also in my textbook, Investigating Facts, which is like a kind of foundation, mainly for Standard 4 students, now getting started with the report writing. But if you have a student at this point in Standard 4 going into Standard 5 and they're still really struggling with report writing, this is a point where we need to go back to the basics. Always start with the basics so that when you're continuing, you can reference, check this in your notes, check this in the text, because they would already have that foundation. Writing is building any kind of teaching about writing. In fact, most things, we give the information, we practice, we go back to the information, practice, and it's like a cycle. So this is where we begin with this foundation cycle. Now I'm reading the definition and then I'll go through a couple of things so that this is what you're making clear to your child or your students this week. And then you want to investigate and look at different types of reports and different things. So definition: an objective and concise written account of something you witnessed, investigated, heard, or did that you present to a specific audience for a specific purpose. It's a mouthful, but it's a very clear definition, and it has a few parts that you want to make sure the child understands. So here are the different aspects of it. We're looking at objective, concise, and in this case, we're dealing with a written account because they're writing it. Then we have something that was witnessed, investigated, heard, or done. And then we're looking at a specific audience for a specific purpose. So there are like 9 different aspects to this. And you want to go through. So that's what you're spending your time on this week. Go through the different aspects of the definition and make sure the student understands what it means to be objective, what it means to be concise, what it means that this is something that was witnessed. What does it mean about investigated? Does that apply to the SEA type report? What was heard? Because part of writing a report is you can include reported speech or indirect speech. And so this is something that the students need to get, and they need to get it early so that they know the kinds of writing and practice that they have to include. And then, what was done, and then this idea of a specific audience for a specific purpose. And as I mentioned last week, one of the differences between report writing and narrative writing that readers and teachers, many people tend to overlook, is this aspect of a specific audience and specific purpose. And what happens there is that we say, okay, there's a prompt and you respond and you have to make it objective, etc., etc. But if you look at all the SEA prompts that focused on reports, and we have three now because this year we had reports. So we have 2019, 2022, 2021. I don't ever remember, one of those, and then 2023 reports. So we have three. And if you look at those three, you would see that in every one, in the prompt, it says, write a report to your teacher, write a report to your principal. It tells students who they are writing the report to. So this idea of having a specific audience is not just, okay, you have an audience to your writing, you need a specific audience. And in my Standard 3 program Sunday, we had a lot of fun discussing the audience. And I had the students do an avatar, and we went through what the avatar would look for and different things. And they had to do some drawings. And so very interactive, because that's the type of interaction I do with teaching these things, to get students really excited and involved in it. And because you really want to have them recognize that they're writing to a particular person, not just a group of people. They are actually writing to a particular person. And this person has a purpose for needing this information. And therefore, there is a very direct and specific purpose for their writing. And so working with the foundation concepts like students understanding the definition and what a report is and so on, it might seem that, okay, yeah, they know that, they've been dealing with this for a while. But if they're missing certain details, like the aspect of that specific audience and specific purpose, then it's going to oh, hinder and hamper, and I just joined those two words, right? It's going to hamper their progress because they're not going to understand. They would think that they can just, add in details because reports need details. But part of the rubric, the holistic grading rubric, which is the one that the examiners use, one of the lines in that, and we're going to look at that in a little bit, one of the lines in that says relevant to the task, relevant information. And for a student to decide and to be able to identify what is relevant and what is irrelevant, they have to go to the purpose. Why am I writing this? Who am I writing to? What do they need this for? And then based on that, they can say, well, yeah, they will need this information then, or nah, I don't need to add that. So making sure students understand the purpose and why they are writing in a particular task, that is going to go a long way for helping them really make those kinds of decisions in terms of the choice of details. And this is something that they would have to be reminded of, but definitely you want to start this week. And even before they start writing, what we need to do is to make sure they understand the details. And just as a quick aside, as I said that, I remembered a quotation. I think it was Abraham Lincoln is attributed to, but he said that, if you give him a tree to chop down, um, he would spend, let's say you give him an hour to chop down a tree, he would spend the first 45 minutes sharpening the axe. And so this is what we're doing now. I know I misquoted that, but I hope you get the point, right? Um, this is what we're doing now. We're laying the foundation so that when we get to the skills and we're drilling skills and practicing skills, students will have a context. So you don't have to rush through. Rushing through is going to cause students to miss things, and that's going to cause you to have to repeat and repeat in the point of starting from scratch. Repetition with context when something has already said is reinforcement. If you miss it, and you have to start from the beginning, that's not reinforcement, that's starting over. And while that is okay, we do everything we need to do, it would be a lot easier and more effective for students if they get more repetition than starting over. So take the time to make sure students understand the reports and the definition, this idea of specific audience and specific purpose. And while you're doing this, you can also introduce the different types of reports. Now, I've heard people talk about eyewitness reports, and different teachers have different names for things, and quite often we're talking about the same things, just that we have different terminology and references. One of the things that I teach students from early on would be the different types of reports. And there's a reason for that. So we're just doing different types now. But when we get to the details, and approaching the different types of reports, you'd find that, for example, a competition report, when you have to report on a competition, that's going to be very different from reporting on a project, which is going to be different from in terms of the kinds of details to help guide students and what they need to do. So the idea is that, let them learn the different types. I work with 5 different types. I've added a sixth one because I know natural disasters and understanding that would help. But to be quite clear, when I studied the past papers for reports and report writing, what I found is that while we have the different kinds of reports, the SCA reports, now that we have 3 to work with, take a moment and study them. If you don't have a copy, you can get from I have it on my website. You can download copies of the creative writing past papers from 2019 to 2024 should be there. If you don't have a copy, then let me know. I'll share the link in the chat, I guess, in the comments after the live. But if you study those, 2019, I believe is 21, and then the 24, 23, sorry, what are we in? 24, yes, 24. If you study them, you would see that there are certain themes that recur. There's always something happening in the schoolyard or on the school compound, like an incident or an accident. There's always some kind of project or activity that students would go on, and there's always some kind of presentation or like an event that would need to be described. So within those 3 types of reports, so we're talking about incident and accident, which I put a slight difference, SEA doesn't, but for clarity to help my students, I make a difference so I can show them how to respond effectively. But SEA doesn't really. So you'd have incident and accident, so that's 2. And then the activity, which could be like a field trip or a project or um, let's say some sort of thing happening at school and so on. Then we have an event, which would be like a presentation. Somebody came to the school to give a presentation, or there's some kind of speaker audience kind of thing happening. So those are the clear 4 that I recognize directly from the past papers. And then the other one that I cover would be competition, which we have individual competitions and group competitions and so on. So what that allows students to do is to sort of group their ideas and learn skills related to these instead of seeing each individual task or prompt as something unique and on its own. Once students are able to fit it within a category, then they would be a lot more confident dealing with it, because then they would say, yeah, I know this. We did stuff like this in class. And, so they recognize how the prompt is formatted and all those things. So you want to work with the different types of reports. If you don't already have that information, certainly you can find that in the digital documents, the 5 reports challenge that I have. If you don't have a copy, you can check me for that. If you want to get a more practical, interactive format, then the textbooks, I go through each type separately so that you can have that understanding. So this week, remember, we're working with a timing of 2 sessions, 30 minutes each, and then one session that's a little bit longer. Since we're at foundation, we probably can do 3 30-minute sessions, and then when we start writing full essays, then we can add some more to it. So we want to have like 3 touch points each week dealing with reports. So and we don't necessarily have to do full 30 minutes now because of what we're doing, foundation. So this week, here's what you're doing. You want to make sure students know the different types of reports. You want to make sure students understand the definition of reports and what that means, how it's going to affect their writing by looking at the different aspects of it. And you want to make sure that students understand why they have to do this. And that, again, that might sound, just tell them do it and let them do it. Why do they have to understand why? I've learned that, the children that we're working with nowadays, they have questions. And I don't know, they're not like the way we used to be. Well, not most of us anyway, when we were younger. They ask questions. And if they don't see a reason for doing what they're doing, they mightn't, yes, they listen to Miss and whatnot, but at the back of their mind, they're struggling because it's not making sense. They don't know why they have to do this. So let me give you 3 reasons why, and then based on these 3 reasons, I'm telling you as the adult, these 3 reasons, you're going to explain it to the kids. This is why we're doing report writing. So the number one thing is that this type of structure for report writing is the closest you would get to what we consider as true academic writing. Um, for the primary school level, and this kind of academic writing excuse me, helps students organize their ideas so that we get beginning, middle, end. They get to organize their ideas. They work with things like topic sentences, grouping ideas into main ideas into paragraphs, and having supporting details. And those kinds of skills are touched on, reviewed, and practiced, and absolutely needed at every stage of their schooling. They're doing it at primary school now. Secondary school, they will do it over and over. University for undergrad, they will do it. For masters, they will do it. For PhD, they will do it over and over. So if they get this kind of foundation now to be able to think objectively and kind of try to separate themselves from the information, to be objective, to be formal, and so on, what's going to happen is that all those other touch points, when they get to secondary school, etc., it'll be a little bit easier for them to handle. So the whole idea is that we're getting them into academic writing so that they can have a stronger foundation and not feel distressed when they have to do writing at various levels. Um, the the idea then is that we want to really give that kind of foundation. So that's one. Two, report writing requires a certain level of critical thinking and making choices. And while it might not seem like a writing thing, it's across the board with writing. We're giving them practice in making choices. We're giving them practice in being decisive and really um, again, yeah, it's just pretty much making choices. And we know that in today's world, students have a huge range of choices, and we want them to make wise choices. A wise choice is based on evidence, it's based on information, and weighing the pros and cons and then making a decision. It's not just, I thought this up and I'm writing it. So we're introducing them and to the idea of making critical choices through critical thinking, analyzing, finding evidence to support points and that kind of thing. That is going to be important for life as well as academics. And the third thing is that this is a way to check their understanding of English language writing, grammar, spelling, punctuation, and so on. So these are the three main reasons that. So, and I explain this to them. And why do I need to do it? Well, writing is communication. And in order for you to communicate effectively in writing, for other people to know what you're saying and for it to make sense to other people, you have to practice. You have to learn how to do it. And it's going to be, you're going to have to repeat it over and over, but they will get it eventually. Um, oh, I have a question. A child who dislikes writing. Um, what advice? Find out why. Now, when a child dislikes writing, we might assume the reason for it, but if we ask the question and we really listen, we can realize why. Some children dislike writing because they feel like it's a waste of time. Why do I have to do this? Yes, for an exam, but why do I have to do this just for the exam? And so, if we could make writing feel a lot less like only for an exam and more like something that they're going to need and that will actually help them, it will reduce some of the dislike. Many children dislike writing because it's difficult and it's challenging and they don't know what to do or how to do it. So if we give them the skills and we show them how to do things and they can see that, hey, this isn't as hard as I thought it was, they would dislike it a lot less. And some students dislike writing because they are graded and they're graded quite harshly. And adults tell them things like, go and fix it, but they don't know how to fix it. And adults tell them things like, you can't write, you're not making any sense. I don't understand this. And writing, because of how closely connected it is to communication, it is closely connected to our sense of identity. And human beings tend to judge others based on how they speak and how they write. And we tend to put those who can write well and speak well, who are more articulate with their words and they have broader vocabulary and expressions, we tend to put these people at a higher level. And anybody who can't speak well or can't write well, we put them at a lower level. And even as children, they pick up on that so that the smart children and the bright children in class are the ones who can write well and speak well. And the not so smart students, the one we might want to call stupid or dunce, they're the ones who can't speak well and who can't write well. Aside from everything else, even if they're pretty good in math, we say things like, she's good in math, but her writing is so good, and then we get very negative. And so when a student approaches writing and they feel like it's innate, the identity is attached to this, and they're getting 6 out of 10 and 4 out of 10 and, 8 out of 20 and those kinds of things, they feel badly and they feel something is wrong with them. And then we would say, okay, you need more expressions or you need more details. But do we tell them where to find the details, how to write the details when they find it, and anything like that? We don't quite often. And that's why a lot of lessons culture is so strong because creative writing isn't taught the way it could be taught to make it interesting in school. And quite a number of teachers don't like writing either. And so when they have to do creative writing, they do the least, or it's difficult for them too, so they don't even know how to approach it. And so the whole thing about writing is crazy for everybody involved. But it could be so much fun. When I tell you it could be so much fun. I mean, like my students, my standard three students, we had lovely discussions about, who they're writing to, who is the audience, what the audience is about. And, they're not writing for themselves. And then they did some artwork and they had to create funny names that they had to name their avatars. And that makes it interesting. And so next week when we meet, they're not going to come to class thinking, oh gosh, this is creative writing. Oh no, I have to do this. It's because of the exam and the grumbling. They wouldn't come to class like that. They would come to class, hey, we had fun last time. Let me see what Miss come. Miss says she bring in some kind of activity. I want to see what it is. And they're coming to it very interested and they're learning while they're doing it. And so for a child who dislikes writing, find out why. Is it difficult for them? Are they being expected to do things that they weren't really taught to do, which is going to make it feel like they are less than capable? Then that is where you want to start. Find out why, and then start putting things in place to make the writing fun, to make it interesting, break it up in smaller pieces. That's why I said, like 20 to 30 minutes, 3 times a week, as opposed to, okay, let's sit down and knock out this report. No, we want the learning. So we want to input before we ask for output. And so that's something that applies across the board for everything. We want to input before we output, but specifically in writing, telling somebody how to do something is not input for writing. We need demonstration so that I show you how to do it. Then we need collaboration. Then we work on it together. Then we want peer collaboration, um, which means the students work on it together and the teacher or the adult supervises. And then you want individual work. So we don't show them how to do it or tell them what to do and we write it on the board and then they do it. When we write it on the board, that's a example. We want to actually practice it and write and brainstorm with them and go through the whole process. And then we work on something together and then they work on something with each other and then you test or you check in, can they do it on their own now? So it's a process. And that's why we're spending all this time dealing with the foundation. I know a lot of other classes, a lot of teachers and students, they're already writing full essays, full reports, and so on at this point. Unless you began with the foundation, doing those things right now is going to be too quick. And you will see the difference when you take the time to do the foundation. So I hope that answers the question and gives you a bit of foundation for that. Um, the investigating facts text that I mentioned, that I have a program that comes with a textbook, a workbook, and a journal because you want to spread it out. And each lesson comes with an activity because we want to make writing interesting and fun, not just because learning could be fun, which it can be, but because students tend to feel more interested and more engaged. And therefore, when you get that, that's half your battle right there. Because when things get difficult, they're going to remember the fun stuff, and you could say, okay, not today, but let's work on this today. And they will do it not feeling overwhelmed because they've had the fun stuff and the beginning of it. So experiments and activities and questions and answers and not just sitting with a book all the time, that makes a difference. So let me just recap with the reports. I'm looking at my time. So what I need to show you now is the rubric. Where is it? Holistic for reports, right? This is available in SCA Peaceful Approach. If you don't have a copy and you want to get a copy, um, then you can let me know and I can get one for you. I want to point out just, I would say maybe I'll do 5 quick things with the reports because we need to go on to the narratives and I want to show you something similar with the narratives. So let's take a look at that now. And again, you can download your own copy and make sure you have that. So this is the holistic rubric. And oh, you know what? Let me stop this for a minute. Let me tell you about the other one first. I'm going to put that in the comments because this is the one that you're going to see first from teachers. So that one, we call it CLUG because we like to pronounce acronyms. Um, but that has to do with content language, organization, and grammar, right? And this one is, right? So that's CLOG, CLOG, content, language, organization, and grammar. This one is used for teaching. In the documents that the Ministry of Education issued, I think the 2019 exemplars, I believe there's a 21 booklet as well. You would see this because this is to help teachers provide instruction and feedback. It's separated into 4 components, and students are graded out of 20 when they're graded using this because each section is worth 5 marks, right? So content, I'm seeing a question there. I'll come to the question in a little bit. Content has to do with the information. So if it's a report, then we're looking at how many details did you stick to the context given, those kinds of things. If it's a narrative, then do readers understand the story? That kind of thing would be content. Language has to do with, in a report, is it formal? Is it structured? Is it used effectively? Sufficient vocabulary? In a narrative, expressions, vivid and descriptive, and so on. Organization, structure of the report, beginning, middle, end. Um, Transition words to blend structure and that kind of thing. In a narrative, it would be plot, chronological order, flashback. What are we using for the plot? Is the plot clear? For grammar, grammar includes the subject verb agreement, spelling, punctuation, um, the like parts of speech, um, all of those things kind of couched on the grammar. And so that's what teachers would be able to grade with. So when you get a feedback and you see um, content 3, language 2, organization 4, grammar 3, then you can see where the student's weak area is, and you know where to put in a little bit more effort. And usually you can get some notes on each of them so you know exactly how to deal with it. And so this is the recommended one. While students are learning, this is the one that students would be following and should be following so that you can see the different sections of it. And then we have the holistic one, which is the one that is used by the examiners just to give an overall grade. And that is what we were looking at. That's what I was sharing screen a little bit just now. Let's see, where is the, oops, did I close it off? Sometimes when I have too many things open, I close off things that I'm not supposed to. I think I did. Ah, there we go. Right, so now I could share it again. So now when you study it, as I have, you realize that they're checking the same thing. For example, factual language, formal tone, that's language, fluent sentences, all of that language, transitional words and phrases, logical sequencing, that's the organization. Minor lapses in grammar, spelling, punctuation, that's the grammar section. Content would be carefully selected, specific, relevant to task, main ideas specific to task, etc. That's the content. So content, language, um, organization, grammar. It still follows CLOG, CLOG, but what's different here is that they're not looking at it individually, marking content separately from grammar, separately from language. It's all combined. And overall, how do these things work together? And then you get a grade. you get a mark for the combination of things. So the CLOG, which is the CLOG, Content Language Organization Grammar, that works for pinpointing areas where students need to practice and develop. And then when it comes closer to the exam and students are combining all their skills, you want to get an overall idea of how they're performing, then most teachers switch to the holistic rubric um, when they're and that would be, I would say, like from January or so up until December, you're still working with specific areas. After that, you want to see how everything works together. And so that is the holistic rubric. And the main thing that I want to focus on here is that details which are all carefully selected, specific and relevant to task. Um, Next week, one of the things we're going to be looking at is analyzing prompts and how important that is, because students can write a wonderful report and get really low marks if they write the report on the wrong thing. And so that is something that we want to look at. So get a copy of this, get a copy of the clog rubric, and they're all available on SCA Peaceful Approach in the group. And I know lots of other they I think SCA and Beyond, and there are some other Facebook groups, um, Writers Plus. You can check those groups. You would get the rubrics there as well. And make sure you have a copy of that. And that's what you're going through this week. So you have 3 sessions. At each session, one, we were looking at definition and types. Then we're looking at the rubric, making sure they see what it is they have to do, what is going to be required of them. And then the third one, if you want, you can do a little, kind of quiz or some kind of activity that would reinforce. And, so like maybe if you do the types of reports, you can do like a multiple choice where you give a prompt and what type of report is this, and so on. You could do those kinds of activities going into it. All right. So I want to end with the reports there and now take a look at the narrative. Um, and so for the narratives, we're looking at definition and the rubric, just as we did with the reports. And so for this one, what I want to look at, let's see, this definition I have is taken from the, um, let's see, where did I put that? Right, here we go. This definition is taken from the 7 Stories Challenge documents that I have. This is for, you get samples and prompts and guidelines and so on, how to actually go through. This is really meant for standard 5 students, but at this point I'm actually working with students who are in standard 4 going into 5, and we're going into these details, these documents in detail. Now I'm going to read the definition and then explain a couple things that are important about narratives that students absolutely need to get, and they need to get this early. It is going to save you a whole lot of trouble. So the definition says a brief account of a situation that is shared for entertainment and is told with a balance of narration and description, which shows the connection between events and teaches readers a valuable life lesson. Yes, another kind of mouthful, but it's worth going through this definition. A brief account of a situation that is shared for entertainment and is told with a balance of narration and description, which shows the connection between events and teaches readers a valuable life lesson. 3 things with SEA narratives. One, you really want to focus on a situation, one situation. And one situation is not something that happened over several days or weeks. So like something happened today, and then the student woke up the next day, and then they did some stuff, and then next week, I had a session with a student, and one of the lines in her story was, that was 3 weeks ago, or no, that was 1 week ago. That is not the kind of story that's going to work well for an essay narrative. Whatever the situation is, that was the first reference. What you want to do is to go into detail with that situation. And that is going to make a difference because students are expected to write a very short story. Some people call it a micro story. I am fond of calling it flash fiction, but the idea is that it's a really, really short story. And so you want to focus on that really, really short story. And you also want to think about the fact that to make the short story interesting and exciting, we can't focus on too many things because then you won't be able to give enough details about any one thing. And you'd end up with too much narration, not enough description, because we do need to get that balance. And so we're working with that balance. And then at the end of it, so that's one really short story focusing on one thing. Two, we want that balance between narration and description. And three, life lesson. I call it lessons learned, but some people call it moral of the story. That's the kind of story that you're writing for SE. Absolutely need that. And in order to get that, you need problems, you need conflict, because someone would learn a lesson based on an experience that they had. And then when they think back about the experience, like, yeah, I ain't gonna do that again because I need to be kind to my friends, or I need to be more respectful to my mom. They learn something based on an experience that happened to them that wasn't so pleasant, but they kind of got out of it and they figured things out. And so that is something that you want to pay attention for the narrative definition. So we're working with flash fiction, really short story. And because of that, we need to make sure we stick to one situation. We need to make sure we balance the narration and description. And we need to make sure we have a lesson, and that lesson comes out of conflict. So that's like the foundation there with that. And having said that, let me go to answer the question that came up earlier. So the question asks, can this advice be used for all the different learning styles and the different types of learning? So I'll explain it like this. While learning styles and the learning style theory is very strong and pervasive, and we tend to use that as a default, Um, current research suggests that students work best when they are exposed to multiple learning options. And what I mean by that is if you have, let's say, audible learner, they like to hear things. If they hear it in combination with seeing it and actually doing things, it'll be reinforced better. So if you present an audible learner or auditory learner with only, multiple things, the majority of things that they hear only, it's not going to make as much of a difference to them than something that is presented in multiple ways. And the reason for this is that while we might feel we have preferences, all our senses are activated in life on a regular basis. So right now I'm speaking to you, but I'm also showing the visuals and whatnot. And you have not switched off your smells, because if you smell something right now, you'll still smell it. It's not turned off. If you hear something else other than my voice, your ears aren't turned off. If you Depending on what you're doing now, you might be aware of the seat that you're sitting in if it's uncomfortable, or if it's comfortable, you might relax in it. That's affecting you. It's not switched off. And taste isn't switched off either. If you're eating something, or you just ate something, or you're thinking of eating something, it's not switched off. It's still there. And so we believe that because a learner prefers or they like something, that's not the only way when it comes to learning. So the thing is to use multisensory learning, which is what I advocate when I teach. I use it in my instruction, and I tell everybody use multisensory learning. And that means that students need to be exposed to the content in multiple different ways, using as many senses as possible over time. So if you can get something that is multisensory in and of itself, perfect, but sometimes you might have to do like different lessons and focus on a different sense each lesson. But definitely work with multisensory learning. So you may sort of favor one or the other because you want to make it enjoyable for the student. But you'd be surprised when you use the multisensory learning, a child who says they prefer to hear it, if they hear it, see it, experience it, they have a lot of fun anyway. And they would never say, well, I didn't want that because it's part of. And so multiple senses at the same time or in succession, but definitely multisensory learning. And so with that, um, I do lots of experiments, like the one we did with the standard three students where they had to do artwork. So they're not only receiving information, they're also producing. And for me, that's quite aside from the multisensory approach, making sure that students don't only receive, they also produce in multisensory ways, that makes a difference. So I'm not telling them things and I'm not showing them videos and doing all kinds of wonderful things. And then when they have to share with me, all they're doing is writing or speaking. We do need to have students produce in multisensory ways as well. And so that multisensory input, multisensory output, once you have that foundation, students are going to be um, very much more engaged, and they would also be able to more likely remember things. And just as an aside, nobody says ever I am I learn through smell, right? That's not one of the learning styles, but it's one of our most acute senses. So much so that research shows that students who study with a certain smell, when they go into the exam, if they have that smell around while they're doing the exam, they perform better because smell helps with memory and recall. And so, an audible learner, if you're focusing on that auditory input only, we neglect that whole value of smell that can help enhance the learning. And I mean, the smell industry is huge. We have aromatherapy, we have all these scented candles, this and that, and air fresheners and scented things for laundry. And it's huge because of how important it is to humanity. And food smells good, we eat it, kind of thing. If it doesn't smell good, we don't want that. So smell is critically important, but it was not factored into learning styles when it can have a huge impact on learning. So multisensory learning, that's my advice when it comes to teaching and that kind of thing. So, all right, so let me show you the rubric for narratives. This is the rubric, and yes, you can get the rubric in SA Peaceful Approach. If you have any challenges locating anything, send me a message, tag me in a comment, WhatsApp me. Um, which reminds me, let me see, can I put up my WhatsApp number here? Right, 7174993. That is my number. Will it go up? as well. Let's see. There we go. I can. So 7174993. If you want a copy of these rubrics and you don't know exactly where to find them, you looked and you don't see it, send me a WhatsApp. WhatsApp me an email address, and I could just email them to you. Perfectly fine, not an issue at all. All right. So I'm going to take the number off so that we could focus on this. Um, Let me go back to the rubric. Let's see, rubric. All right. So the narrative rubric, the number one thing I want you to remember is that there is a difference between exemplary, proficient, and progressing, and it's very, very clear in the narrative rubric. And the reason I'm starting here is because I want you to pay attention to this first line. I'm hoping that you could see it pretty okay. Let me enlarge my screen. Yes, I think you can see it okay. Um, that line says that the response exceeds the expectations for the task. What are the expectations? That comes under proficient. The response is relevant to the task. So everything that's in there, that's what is expected. It's relevant. We get it. Um, but if you want to get those high marks, you have to look at being a little bit more skillful with, than just what is expected. And so getting a copy of this and studying it and going back to the definition, this is what you're doing this week with the narrative writing. You're going to be going through this, making sure you recognize that we're dealing with both vivid, descriptive, and figurative language. Well, all three. Vivid language, descriptive language, figurative language, three separate things. We need to know what each are and how to deal with it, how to produce it, what it looks like. Um, we also need to look at um, sensory details. We need to look at physical description, actions, and dialogue. Dialogue is something that many students. I had a student tell me, "Miss, I don't write any dialogue in my story." I'm like, "Why?" Well, I don't know. I don't see what are you using dialogue for. A child like that will not get anything beyond 14 to 16. They would not get into the 19-20 category because dialogue is absolutely required to get into that category. And so what exactly is expected of the student? That is what you want to review. Make sure students know what is expected of them. So when you say content, what is the content? When you say language, what is the language? When you say organization, what is there? When you say grammar, what is there? Make sure students understand and make sure you understand what each aspect of this is. And so where we're looking at the narrative heavy on the description to establish um, narrative elements, and we want that sensory detail, very heavy on that. And you'd notice words like vividly established and um, expertly developed. What exactly does that mean? It helps to have an example so that you could show students this is a story, this story works, and this is why it works, and so on. So make sure if you don't already have samples, make sure you get copies of samples. I have a few, you can check me out for those. Um, Read samples, show students. So this week, you're reading reports, you're reading narratives, already done samples, and say, hey, this is why this works. You see how this is done, and so on, and make sure they're clear. This is what they're aiming for. It's also a good idea to set targets this week. So, in terms of what kind of grade you're looking for, how to get there, have those kinds of discussions this week as we're settling in and so on. And again, supplementing what teachers are doing. Or if you are the primary instructor, then you are building that solid foundation to make sure students really they're approaching it in an effective way. So I'm looking at my time. I'm seeing it's just a little past 12. I'm going to ask for another 10 minutes um, to take a quick look at the comprehension because I really want to lay the foundation for the comprehension as well today so that when we get into the whole thing, we're going to be looking at comprehension at a quick pace and you have that foundation. So for the comprehension today, what I want to identify, and this is what you're looking at this week when you're doing your comprehension practice, take a look at the different types of texts. So if you don't already have, get your hands on the past papers and you're taking a look at all these different types of texts and how they show up. So I'm going to type those out. So we have four, right? And I know in the comprehension, when they get it in the exam, they only have three, but that's because the first one, the passage, you can have options with the passage. You don't just get the same kind of passage every single time. There's a choice between two. So we have nonfiction, fiction, that's with the passages. Then we have the poetry, and then we have, excuse me, and then we have the graphic, right? So those are the four different types of comprehension texts that students can encounter. So every exam, they will get a poem and a graphic, but when it comes to the passage, sometimes they get fiction, sometimes they get nonfiction. And as I mentioned last week, the differences between those four different types make it so that if a student is approaching a poem the way they approach nonfiction, they're going to get into trouble in how they answer. If they're approaching a graphic the way they would approach like fiction or a passage, they're going to get into trouble simply because what is being asked is so different that they really do have to see it like a separate task. So it's not all comprehension and therefore I approach all the same way all the time. It's different. And so let me give you a couple differences between them. And the agenda this week with comprehension is recognizing those differences and how they impact on how the student will approach the different tasks that they're asked to do. So nonfiction, the type of nonfiction that you would get for SEA, you would get like informational articles, right? And that's the kind of nonfiction. And so we have a variety of nonfiction, but the type that you would see in the passage is an article that gives information about a particular topic. Nobody's trying to convince anybody of anything. We're just giving facts and details about a particular topic. And when we do that, we use topic sentences. So we have main ideas and supporting details. Introductions are structured in a particular way with a main idea for the entire passage. And then we have like facts and details and that kind of thing. So you're likely to get a main idea question here. Um, and then details and of course the vocabulary and so on. But it's more like the kind of formal kind of thing, kind of akin to like reports. But you're not getting a report on like an activity really. You'd get more like like kind of like an encyclopedia article or like a news article that presents content information. So it's not a lot of action, but a lot of information in terms of this is how things are. That's what you get for the nonfiction. On the other hand, fiction, you'd get a short story, right? That's what you're going to get in the fiction. And that short story usually includes a lot of dialogue. It includes characters, multiple characters. I think at least about three characters. And so what you're going to get here would be um, emotions and feelings, and you get questions like, how does this character feel about this one? How do you feel about the particular character? What do you think that character will do? So it's a lot about characters and their feelings and behaviors because this is a story. And so you can't approach that like facts because the way you'll have to interpret things is going to be very different. For nonfiction, you're not interpreting anything really. You have the details there, and then you add your ideas to what is already there, even with the extension questions. With fiction, you're adding your ideas after you've interpreted and understood why did the character do this? Why do you think? And so on. So it's a different approach. The same way we have a different approach to reports and narratives, it's the same way nonfiction and fiction, there are different approaches to the comprehension. Then we have the poem or poetry, and then this is a lot about emotions as well. And let's see, so there's emotions, let's call it literary devices. Let's use that word. Right? What's strong in a poem would be the literary devices. So yes, students will have to identify, simile, metaphor, etc. Yes, they will have to look for, what sense was activated in this particular thing. But overall, understanding a poem, even though we could say it's a sort of blend between fiction and nonfiction because sometimes we're writing about things that actually happened, but we're doing it in such a creative way. We're using a lot of literary devices. And so students need to recognize that. And interpreting a poem means understanding those literary devices and getting the details necessary from a poem. You need to understand the literary devices. And so that's not the same way you would approach a fiction piece, even though they're similar. Because of how concise a poem is, we have to approach it a little bit differently. Yes, it's comprehension, but we're going to be able to understand it and do a lot better if we approach it differently. And then we have the graphic, right? With the graphic, our main takeaway from the graphic and approaching graphics has to do with the fact that we're dealing with a lot of visual information. And the reason I mention that is because when you look at a graphic, yes, a lot of the SEA graphics have words and so on, but many times the main thing about a word isn't always what the word means, but how the word is presented. Is it all caps? Is it big? Is it bold? Is it darker print, bold print, colored? Why is this word presented in this way? That changes the meaning, gives a emphasis and those types of things. So graphics, we can't approach graphics as we would a text because we're not going to get a sentence or a paragraph to try to figure out the main idea. In a graphic, we have to get the main idea and the point that the creator was aiming for using visual elements. And when I say visual elements, we really do need to study visual elements because many people, when they say visual, they look at maybe color and size. But in addition to color and size, we have placement, we have location, we have couple other visual elements that we need to understand with the graphics. So we need to study graphics separately and not just say, okay, practice, figure this out. There are strategies that can be learned when studying graphics, and that would help students really develop their understanding of graphics a lot better. And so These are the things that I cover in my comprehension classes. I have one comprehension class running. It's on a Thursday. This is for standard fours. It's on a Thursday from what is the time in this one? Let me see if I remember. 6:30 to 8 o'clock, because I do an hour and a half per session. And during those sessions, we go into a lot of details on this. So there's only so much that I can share here because of the kind of time that it takes. Notice I said this is an hour and a half for comprehension alone versus 20 minutes, 15 minutes during the live. I'm not able to go through all the details. So I am creating content in terms of like a text with practice and details for each of these so that you'd be able to get that. I am, fingers crossed that I get to finish. I've been working on it for a bit. Sometimes things take a little longer with me, but it'll get there. It'll get there. I'm working on it. Um, but I know the issue isn't teach children comprehension or test their comprehension. The issue is, what do we want them to understand? What exactly are we asking them? So in my classes, I know I study the questions, have students create their own questions, and we review that so that they know what examiners are really asking for, and then they could find the answer. Because if they're creating a question, they have to provide an answer for it, right? Marking key. So we go through all of these kinds of practices, and this is what really helps students when they separate it and they say, okay, poem now, and they go through poem. And then they finish with the poem graphic, they switch. I'm not dealing with poetry anymore, I'm dealing with graphic. And so they approach it in a more interesting kind of fun way. And then they know what to look for because they know it's something different. They're not trying to look for main ideas, they're trying to look for concepts and purpose and different things with a graphic. And that's different from all the other types of texts. So I'm going to wrap it up now. And I think that is pretty much a solid foundation. You have a lot to do this week if you're following along. Then, so we're working on reports. You have those sessions. We're working on narratives, and we're working on understanding the differences between these types of comprehension texts. And you can actually get a copy of the past papers and study them. If you want a copy of the past papers grouped, already grouped in the different sections like this, so all the poetry from 2019 to 2024, all the graphics from 2019 to 2024, so that you can study them separately, which I do highly recommend. I've already done that, and the answers as well, so you can have the um, blank paper and the answers that you could go through and study and see that you understand and the child understands the differences between the two, between the different types of texts. All right, so like I said, that's it. Winding up. Next week we're going to start looking at we're going to take a quick look at types of reports again, types of narratives, but very briefly, because the main session for next week is going to be on the prompts. So we're going to look at narrative prompts and report prompts and see what they look like, the separation. And we're also going to look at the different types of questions that students can encounter when it comes to the comprehension. So that's the agenda for next week. I am so grateful for those of you who were able to be here during this live today, and let your colleagues and other parents know that it's recorded, but no, I'm not able to stream the live in the group. We'd have to look at the live being at the YouTube and on the Facebook page. Um, so, but it's archived there, and I normally put it up on my website as well. So if you want to find everything in one place instead of having to scroll and all of that, you can check my website. So this one is going to go up sometime this evening, so you can check tomorrow for that. And thank you for the questions. Please, if you have any questions afterward, send me a message, and that would be perfectly fine. So I do look forward to continuing with you. Send me questions, WhatsApp, um, as well, Facebook, so that I can help you as much as I can with the journey to SEA 2025. All right. Thank you so much again. Have a good one, and I shall see you next week. Bye bye.